Hi, everybody. Zeke Torres again, and more about Git. So, what we're going to talk about right now is something that I think some people do stumble on. Maybe it's just more of where to get started and what do I do and what does my folder look like? What considerations do I need to have? This is all important because if you've been following the sequence of media that I've laid out, you've got GitHub set up with your own account. You've got your GitHub desktop downloaded and installed, and you now have a project, a folder, some code that you want to initiate with the Git repository. So we're going to go through the Git init and steps and walk through what that looks like and kind of give you an orientation of what you should do, as well as talk about some do's and don'ts. But I think a lot of people get hung up with what part of a folder structure do you want to actually initiate a repository on. So let's look at an example of some work that we might find in a folder that relates to a project. So I've got a project that's called NNCBS, and it's got 4 different subfolders. And let's say, for example, that each one of these is a distinct project. So there's a few ways that we can consider initializing a repository. And one of the reasons why that matters is because a repository will start at a folder and then track everything below it. So if we were to initiate a repository here inside of the project called Square 03, then the repository would be something that would manifest itself here, and it would track any of the changes or any of the folders or any of the elements or objects in that folder. If we were to start a repository here in the project called Square 02, then that repository would track from this folder and its subfolders, whatever folders are nested underneath it. So it is important to actually ponder and consider how you choose to initiate the repository, where you choose to initiate the repository, because in this example where I have an entire comprehensive project called NNCBS exist, it may be beneficial to initiate the repository at this level because it will then track every one of these subfolders. Now that is a very comprehensive way to encapsulate all of the changes for a project. And so it's one consideration that I think is worth investigating or talking amongst yourselves as a team, or looking at whatever work you have individually in terms of what you need to do for the work that you have, for the code that you need to manage, or the project you need to encapsulate or protect with Git. So a quick recap. I have a project called NNCBS Exist. It's a very big project, and it has kind of 5 or 4 separate subfolders. Each one of those could be its own project. So each one of these could be its own repository. Or if I choose a broader repository, I could initiate a repository at this level and encapsulate and protect or manage via my Git repository all of those subfolders. But here is the catch. If I initiate a Git repository here and manage these subfolders via that repository, you cannot now nest another Git repository underneath it. So that's a distinction, right? If I choose one method where this is its own repository and I have a Git repository managed and functioning here, I now cannot come at this level and initiate another repository. So a Git repository starts at a parent folder level and manages subfolders. But that means a subfolder now cannot be initiated with its own repository. It would cause conflict with Git. So one of the things that we need to learn about Git are rules, things to be aware of, key basics. And we're going to talk about that next in the next slides. So you have an assignment here to go back to your folder and find something ideal with which you can practice. I've actually put this .zip with this example of sample code and sample files in a Git repository with a link from the paper so you can actually download this and play with this yourself the same way. So that way you don't tamper with your own code and make a mistake. And I'll explain soon why we really can't make mistakes with Git. But the next media clip is important because we're going to talk about some basic rules, some basic things that we need to consider before we initiate a Git repository. So again, this one was about what or where we would initiate a Git repository, because I think it's important for you to start to ponder that. The next one is about what to keep in mind, what basic rules we want to have as you start to initiate Git in the folders that you're going to pick and where you're going to have your code. Thanks.